The financial crisis left in its wake huge losses and huge disruptions to the financial system, and yet there have been very few prosecutions. Jean, why is that?
What we found out in a letter sent this month from the Department of Justice to Senator Charles Grassley is the government says it simply doesn't keep tally of the number of executives it's prosecuted. So it says it just doesn't know how many people.
But hang on, but there's such a small number. How can it not just do the homework and find out very quickly?
Well, certainly there are critics saying that it's very convenient that they choose no longer to keep the numbers this way. They certainly used to in the last savings and loans crisis. We've dug up a report from way back then where they said it was unfair to accuse them of letting the major crooks off the hook because, look, here's this high percentage of people they prosecuted who are senior executives or boardroom insiders. So the question is, why aren't they doing the same sums these days? Why is the math so different? What critics are saying is it's because there's been virtually no one from Wall Street prosecuted. It's tiny numbers of prosecutions.
But is that because the regulations got so lax that there wasn't anything they could be prosecuted under? Is it because agencies haven't gone after them? Or is it because they didn't do anything wrong? I mean, what is the reason for it?
Well, there's still a really serious argument on exactly those points, and no one can agree as yet. And certainly what the Justice Department is saying, and officials very regularly these days, is look, we've investigated all this conduct, and what we found is a lot of what went on was unethical or bad judgment or generally, unfortunate behaviour, but that doesn't make it criminal. That a lot of it, might have been wrong in the sense of what the public thinks, but that's very different from meeting the standard of proof to actually put someone behind bars. On the other hand, there are also people who say, actually, with this crisis, the law enforcement agencies were slow to react. You didn't get the type of big task forces set up quickly enough that we saw, for example, with Enron. So there's this divided opinion on why.
Why not? Why were they slow to react?
I think it was partly when the crisis hit, the law enforcement agencies understandably were very focused on terrorism, so a lot of resources had been diverted away from white-collar crime, and it took time to come back and get the focus back on these sort of levels of financial fraud.
But one of the big questions that's been around for the financial industry ever since the crisis was, how much regulation should there be? What should the rules be, and how tied up in knots basically should finance be because it got too deregulated, too big? Have there been changes in laws since the crisis that would make, in retrospect, would more people have been caught under those rules if they had been enforced at the time? Have there been changes that have been substantive?
Not necessarily affecting the kind of behaviour that's at the centre of this particular argument. So in terms of these issues of disclosure of losses, in terms of the kind of battling to save firms from going under, did people cross the line? I mean, those sort of issues, we're still back to the securities laws of the 1930s, in essence. What's interesting with the crisis is we've had this massive new legislation, the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Act, but a lot of that is regulating areas that weren't necessarily central to this issue of Wall Street conduct. So we've got a whole new raft of regulation, but would it make this question come up with a different answer? Not necessarily.
So ultimately, what we're saying here is greed may have been prevalent, incentive structures may have been wrong, people may have got very close to lines or maybe even tweaked across lines, but that actually the Justice Department, for example, when they look at these things, have not, in their view, got clean enough cases to actually go after this stuff.
That's exactly it. That's certainly what they would say in most of the cases they've looked at so far. They've done a lot of investigations. They've looked into a lot of the most controversial kind of financial instruments at the centre of it and come up with very, very, very few prosecutions so far. Now, the only caveat on that is that may yet change. We do have this working group that was set up by the President earlier this year, looking at these mortgage-backed securities, and they're making noises about doing very, very active investigations. Whether that ends up in criminal prosecutions or not, it's too early to tell.